Now, arguably the next most important character in this hierarchy of characters is Vivi, but I would say that Steiner is certainly on a par with him in terms of screen time, and I really quite like this character, and I feel he's worth discussing now in relation to Garnet. So, Steiner's opening slide states, Dilemma. Having sworn fealty, must I spend my life in servitude? And it took me a long time, I think, and I'm talking numerous playthroughs, to actually emote with that statement, because I spent so long just hating Steiner. I thought he was two-dimensional, boring, and unfun to look at or play as. But I've since done a kind of complete U-turn with this character, and I've actually grown to appreciate the severity of Steiner's plight. With the theme of identity in mind, we can look at Steiner as a man who has trained and aspired his entire life to be a faithful knight, the code of which, as it always is to protect and serve your country and royal family. And when the Queen puts him in charge of rescuing Garnet, that is his goal, for good or ill, and nothing will kind of prevent him from performing this duty for the Queen. So, and again, Final Fantasy IX being, in this medieval-inspired sort of world, clearly adopts the code of chivalry and the feudal idea of fealty with Steiner. And back in the more overtly, church-governed times, these vows were taken with all due sincerity, which again lends itself to the personality that we find, Steiner having. I mean, quite early on, Steiner's chivalry is used to comedic effect because he conducts himself with the due pomp and ceremony of a knight, but quickly gets frustrated and loses composure when Zidane mocks him by calling him rusty, or Garnet fails to comply with his orders. And in these early scenes it is of course comedic, but the severity of Steiner's plight always shines through alongside this, because he constantly blames himself and fails to deliver within this identity of a royal knight that he feels, he should be living up to. He also stubbornly refuses to acknowledge the evil of Queen Brane, and again, while this did irk me when I was playing because it's so obvious to the player that she is evil, we need to look at Steiner in the context of his identity as a royal knight. Having sworn this duty, if Queen Brane is evil and not the embodiment of grace and virtue, befitting a benevolent queen, then Steiner's entire raison d'etre is based on a lie. And so yeah, it's really quite interesting, once we start kind of looking more closely at, Steiner and why he is the way he is. The way Steiner's story and the evolution of his identity plays out from this stubborn beginning is actually really quite interesting, because he finds his code of knightly propriety conflicting with the events that he finds himself in. So for example, he despises Zidane and Marcus and Tantalus by default because they are the quintessential scourge of medieval society. They're thieves, kidnappers, and, God forbid, actors. So, he despises these people. However, when he finds people like Zidane showing acts of kindness and Marcus and Blank kind of aiding Princess Garnet, he feels he owes them a debt, and he is mentally incapable of reconciling the idea of a rogue that is also, a good person. Which is, really quite interesting, and, Steiner's revelation finally comes when he discovers Brane is willing to kill Garnet. And it's at this point that he finally liberates himself from his archaic, single-minded identity and reconciles not only with Zidane and Tantalus, but also with General Beatrix, who in a lot of ways is similar to Steiner, and these two are basically, two sides of the same coin. I did also think it was a great little subplot conclusion for Steiner to hook up with Beatrix. I think it was really well delivered because it wasn't too silly, it wasn't too obvious, it was just a nice kind of little subtle thing that kind of took place in the background. So finally, moving on to Steiner's aesthetics, he doesn't so much resemble a traditional square knight class, but rather the styling of an actual European medieval knight. The best addition to Steiner's look, I think, is that his armour kind of clanks as you run around, and it's just small additions like this that make Final Fantasy IX quite distinct and amusing from its predecessors, I think. Steiner's also pretty awesome gameplay wise, and I think he's the strongest in terms of physical attack and defense. So I do find myself using him quite frequently.